Alright, good morning. My name is John Gannon, and I'm going to walk you through a basic import tutorial utilizing Lightroom, Adobe's kick-ass software, which if you've never used it before, I highly recommend it. The software is, in my opinion, one of the best out there, though there are alternatives out there. This is the one that I personally have elected to work with. Now, with that said, what I'm going to do is walk you through the import process, which you see in the bottom left-hand corner. Now what I've done is I've clicked on previous import. We're going to pretend that I don't have 60,000 files imported in this. We're going to pretend like nothing, and we're going to go ahead and click on that. So you're going to move your mouse to the bottom left-hand corner, making sure you're on the Library tab. Now it's important to note I've altered my view just a bit. You'll probably see things up here on your screen that are different. You can change if you wish, but in this particular case, I don't really care about particular avenues of this program, so I've left what I do care about activated. Now once again, that's just simply right clicking on the header bar up here and moving on. Now there's these things up here as well if you wanted to hide to give you a little more screen, same as the bottom, and of course the left and the right should you wish to give your more screen. You can also hit tab, which closes the left and the right, brings it back. Now with that said, let's go ahead and click on import, and it'll take you into the import screen. Now, I don't have my camera plugged in at this point in time. I don't have it turned on. I don't have any source selected. So what you see right now is essentially what is plugged in. You'll see my Macintosh hard drive as well as my external drive here, and that's basically that. Now, if you had a phone plugged in, it will pop up in the screen as well, depending on the phone and manufacturer. But in this particular case, let's just go ahead and plug in the camera, as I've done, and turn it on. Once you've turned it on, in the top left corner up there, you'll see your source under devices. If it doesn't highlight it for you automatically, just go ahead and click on it, and there they are. The photos that I've taken this morning are of Lucky the guinea pig. You can see it says a day ago, which means I've probably got some clock issue, which whatever, I'll need to work out at a later date, but so be it. Alright, now there's a few things that we're going to go over today, one of which is going to be over here on the left side. We're going to walk through the file handling as well as the file renaming. We're going to talk about things that you can apply during the import as well as the destination. These are all very important things that a lot of people ignore when they're doing the import. They just simply don't go through any of this, and they merely move down here and click import without giving anything else a second thought. I'm going to explain to you why this is a mistake, why this screen is probably one of the more important screens you can spend your time in within Lightroom. It's actually quite important, and you'll see why really soon. Now before we get started, I did want to explain a few different things up here. As you're going through, you can select to import photos. So let's say, well, I knew this one was bad and I just don't want to import it, so I'm going to unselect. It's just simply left clicking on that, and so be it. If you don't want to select any of them, for whatever particular reason, let's say you have 1,000 photos here and you only want this one, well, rather than going through, you would just simply check that box. Now, for this particular case, my CF card is empty. I've only taken 2 photos on this particular card since the format, so all photos only reveals 2 cards. Now, if I had clicked all photos, it would, in theory, override this right here, not in the sense that it'll import them, but it'll view them. It'll allow you to see even photos that you've imported. This, in essence, is acting very much the same way. Excuse me. So what you'll get here are new photos taken since the last import. So if you've imported these 2 photos and then I go in and I take 2 more photos, you won't see these again. You'll see everything taken since I've imported these 2 photos. Now, at the very top, you have 2 options. You have the ability to copy as a DNG or to copy. Now, if you simply copy, what it'll do is it'll just import the raw file for you. In my particular case, since I'm a Nikon camera owner, I have NEF files. If you're a Canon owner or a Sony owner, Pentax, etc., you'll see the appropriate extension here. But with that said, the option that Adobe has given you, they've actually created this kick-ass format called DNG. It's a digital negative. It's Adobe's proprietary software. It's Adobe's proprietary format that in essence consolidates and normalizes all of the different types of raw files into one format. The theory behind this is that it essentially allows Lightroom to operate more efficiently. It gives you a better way to handle the files that Lightroom will be able to interpret easier and therefore better. Now, moving on the left over here you'll have file handling. And this is really simply exactly what's going to happen when you import the file. Now, the previews are going to be the things in the top left corner. So if I hit cancel here, you're going to see previews, for example, in the top left up there. With that said, you have the option to do a 1-for-1, a minimal, the embedded with the sidecar, as well as a standard. Now, how you do this is entirely up to you. I generally will elect to do the 1-for-1 because it allows me to zoom in even on the preview going to 100%. It's not necessary. It's not really something that is worthwhile for a lot of people. In my particular case, I do like doing that, but you can do the minimal if you wish. It takes less time to process. It makes the import a lot faster. You can do standard, which in essence gives you a basic preview. Doesn't allow you to zoom in full to show you all of the detail in your preview, but once again, my personal preference is the 1-for-1. Now, the smart previews is if you want to have these available when your device or whatever you've stored your photos on offline. So for in this particular case, I do use my external file here, or my external hard drive. I have an external drive that, as you saw or may have seen before, it's 2 terabytes that's 100% full. I've got this thing stuffed with photos. Now, it's a pain when I unplug this drive because, well, quite honestly, I haven't generated any previews. So if there's times in which you know you're going to be traveling and you want the ability to have all of your photos viewable, you don't necessarily want to edit them, you just want to be able to see them, you would want to use smart previews. It gives you a functional view, but you don't have a copy. You don't have the, you have a copy, you don't have the raw file. So these files are going to be much smaller. They're just going to be simple JPEGs. The analogy that, the explanation that Adobe gives in this particular case is if you were to have 500 photos that would take up 14 terabytes, in this particular case, you'll have 500 photos that'll take up 400 megabytes. So it's a lot less space consumed while still giving you the functionality of not requiring external devices to be plugged in order to view those files. That's your choice. I don't necessarily do it because I travel everywhere with my hard drives, and that's just the way I am. It doesn't do me any good to be able to show files at this moment in time. That's what I use mobile Lightroom for, but we'll get into that a little later. Now, the don't import suspected duplicates, it's a fairly flawless system. I have seen it go wrong in a few particular regards, but otherwise it actually reads the metadata and says, hey, that's a duplicate, and it won't import it. You won't see it over here, it just simply goes away. This goes back to the all photos versus new photos. In this particular case, by checking this box, it just simply won't import the duplicates. Now you uncheck this box, and it probably will. Make a second copy. Now, one of the things that I highly recommend, if you aren't doing at this moment in time, is to back up your photos. You really want to have a functional copy of your Lightroom database as well as your raw files. You want to have them either on a secondary hard drive, you want to have them on your primary hard drive, wherever you wish to store them, you want them to be separate from this. Now, I actually manage all of this separately. I upload to a cloud as well as keeping a mirrored image on a secondary hard drive, so I do it separate to this. However, when you're importing files, it makes it a lot easier to just go ahead and check this box, and then you would select where you want that to be. This is just a recommendation. You can manage this separately like I do, or you can check this box here. Now, one of the coolest things in Lightroom that a lot of people don't take advantage of are collections. Now, collections are essentially an organized list of photos that you can browse through. You can add photos to a collection and you can browse through. You can see what I've gone through here, like my landscapes, for example. I've got all my 2013, 14, 15, Tahoe, and New York. I've got all these different folders here, but if you were to click on these, what you'll see is Lake Tahoe, for example, is just one big folder of all of the Tahoe photos that I've selected. And this is the key here. I've taken over 10,000 photos in Lake Tahoe alone, but in that folder, you're only going to find 50. The reason I've only selected 50 is because, well, those are the ones that I think are the best. Those are the cream of the crop. Those are the ones that I want to have readily available at all times, and I've added them to this collection. Same with 2015, same with 14, 13, etc. I also use this for a lot of my clients, a lot of my events, any fashion shoots that I do. I'll break it down into the selected shots. So I utilize collections to basically manage all the photos that I have selected. Now, let's say you're working in a particular environment to where you know every photo that you've just taken, you're going to add to the collection. Well, you can also uncheck, you only want to import this one. You can choose to do that here. That's entirely your prerogative. This is where you're going to develop your workflow, and you're basically going to decide if you want to add everything to the collection now and then remove it later, or to browse through everything once you've imported and add it later. Either way, it's really not the end of the world. I personally like adding to everything after the fact rather than doing it beforehand, so I leave mine unchecked. Now, file renaming can come in handy for a variety of reasons, but in essence, when you import the files, it gives you the opportunity to utilize the template, so it gives you these options here, or you can actually go in and edit whatever you want it to be. So this comes in handy if you want to start organizing your files directly upon import. Now, I actually manage everything separately. I do it secondary, and I don't bother renaming because I actually use keywords. Now, keywords are actually really important, and you'll find that under the imply during import. So for this particular case, what I would typically do on my keyword is I would just simply put in the subject or the event or the client name. Or if I'm doing a wedding, I would do client name and then perhaps comma, cake cutting, something to that effect. So then later I can find all the photos when I do Control F that are related to cake cutting. This is a really important thing that you can do from the start by keywording your photos. It takes a little bit of time to go through and select each one of the files, but in essence, you can basically, or I don't mean each one of the files, but during the import, you can import all these photos. And you can do this at a later date, but for right now, I really would just recommend this be used for top-level file management, adding keywords. Santa Barbara, for example, I shot all these photos in Santa Barbara, so therefore, for this particular file, these files you'll find, all of these will appear when I type in Santa Barbara when I search later. Now, there is also this option to add a develop setting when you import. You can use presets if you have developed settings generated, which are user presets in this particular case, or however you wish to do it. This is probably one of the most critical aspects of Lightroom that a lot of people overlook. They don't really appreciate the fact that you can pre-develop your photos. Now, there's certain options whenever you're developing a photo that are pretty much going to be standard every single time. You're pretty much going to check the box for profile adjustment. You're going to want to adjust your white balance and all that thing. Maybe you're going to select it as shot, or maybe you want Lightroom to always do its auto. There's different things you can preset and actually apply those during import. To give you an idea of how this can benefit you, when you're doing a wedding, for example, you're going to have a series of photos that are going to be shot in a particular environment. The lighting, ideally, for that particular environment is going to be static. So the reception, for example, is going to be within, let's say, an indoor environment. You're going to be using a flash. Your flash is going to be static for the most part, therefore every photo is going to be developed almost the exact same way. Now I can have a preset generated simply by importing, let's say, one photo, creating a preset for that one photo, and then importing all of them. Now, the one thing that I really like about Adobe is that you can do this at a later date really simply as well. You can apply the preset to as many or as few photos as you wish at a later time, and that's actually what I do. But a lot of people will select it here, and believe it or not, most people don't even know what presets are. But the develop settings are really important. This is something I'll do a tutorial on at a later date, so you can actually see what they do and what they can do for you. Now, metadata, of course, you can go through here and you can edit your presets. You can add all kinds of basic stuff, or you can just use the default presets. This is something that I'll leave for you to play around with. It's another tutorial almost in itself. The metadata is fairly important though, so don't forget about that. Now the destination is the last thing. You can choose to do it into subfolders. You can organize by date, with the date format being as such. And in this particular regard, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm importing into a particular folder, and I'm going into this. Now, with that said, there are some limitations to this, but I don't really want to mess around with that right now. It's going to be a whole other tutorial just to talk about what your destination source files are, etc. You're going to have some issues if you change this. It's tied to your library. I would just say leave it alone for now. You don't want your files all over the place. Just leave it like that. Now, when you're done, you would just simply click import, and then it would process. Now, for whatever reason, at this particular moment in time, these files are not importing. Had I had something proper on here, the files would have imported, they would have processed, and everything would have been fine. But in this particular regard, they're not. The next tutorial will be what happens after the import, and we'll go from there. Yeah, good morning. My name is John Gannon, and I'm resuming the import from your device to Lightroom tutorial. There was a minor problem with my import on the last video, as you may have seen. If you didn't, well, feel free to go back and watch my computer say no. I've fixed the problem. It was essentially getting lost on my hard drive. It didn't know where to import to. For whatever reason, it changed it. So be it. Computers are like that. I've learned not to argue with them, but I do know how to fix them, thankfully. If you find yourself having problems similar to that, if you are having difficulty importing files, feel free to send me a message. And I'll walk you through it as necessary. You can post a comment down below, and I'll see if I can guide you towards some tutorials on how to fix your library. It happens. Lightroom's not perfect, but it happens. So be it. All right. So to get to this screen here, what I've done is I've essentially clicked import. It's gone through the process. You'll see some sliders up here, and things will come across, and you'll see your photos appear here. Now we are in the library module. Your options to then go into the develop module should you wish. But the library tool is actually one that a lot of people just simply don't play around in. I'm not sure why. They just simply will not use this to the greatest extent. We'll leave it as it is for right now. I just want to basically show you what's in here. Now you've imported properly. If you've imported properly, it's going to save wherever you've selected. In this particular case, I've gone with the defaults. So you'll see all of my photos here. Now, it's going to highlight this first, the previous import. I would recommend that you click on this, whatever it is, just simply because it actually gets you into the hard location, the actual location for your photos. There's various sorting issues you'll see if you stay in the previous import. It doesn't quite organize your files as they should. It just simply leaves it the way it is for whatever reason. Click on the dang location and move on from there. Now, these are your files. You can double click and actually view them in full size. You can move using your arrow keys to the left and the right to browse through the folder, or you can click on the photos themselves, as you can see there. Now, everything else on the screen is in essence a reflection of everything from the import screen plus additional data such as the metadata, keywording, and of course you can do quick develop here if you have some saved presets. You can also see your histogram on the screen as well as what settings this particular photo was taken at. So now you can see these particular photos. I elected to not use the flash because I didn't want to scare Lucky, so I increased the ISO. I took him at 70mm because Lucky's a little sketchy. And that's as close as I could get. I think that's pretty decent. And f2.8, of course, and your shutter speed. Now, the basics of Lightroom allow you to browse through and see everything you need to see. You've got your file name here. You've got your folder. You can then go through and start adding copyright information, title. This is all the stuff that you can do in the presets. You can add ratings if you want to browse through that particular way. You can give it labels, which really come in handy. Essentially, all these various things. Now, down below you can see the dimensions, which is something, for whatever reason, a lot of people don't realize. It's actually here on the front page in the library. You can actually see a lot about this file. If you had GPS plugged in, it'll show you the exact coordination. Now, you can actually add comments, but in this particular case, not supported here. So we'll just leave this as it is for now. Now, to move into the development process, you probably have already guessed it, you would just simply click Develop. It'll move over and take that particular photo, and this is the screen you see. Now, I may have explained it in another video or not, but one of the things I like to do is maximize my experience. Now, you can do that by simply hitting Tab, or you can click on these little buttons here. Now, they're still available. If you just mouse over, they will appear. You can click here on this little button to the left, and once again, if you wanted that, you just move over, and in theory it appears, so be it. Click over here, and you'll find the exact same thing. Now, Tab is a quick preview, just gets rid of everything, maximizes your view. I'll generally hide the top because, frankly, once I'm in Develop, I don't really care about anything else up top anymore. I've hidden most everything. You can change a few things over here if you wish, but inevitably, this is the most you'll get. Now, you can also resize your preview. I don't know if you saw that. What I've done is I've moused over this little dividing line here. This dividing line allows you to increase the preview size, which effectively decreases the maximal viewable space. Now, if you have a 27-inch monitor, this might not be as big of a deal as it is to me. Well, I'm operating on my 15-inch MacBook Pro right now, so I want the most space possible. So I've shrank it down. Now, I still want somewhat of a preview down there, but it really doesn't matter to me, so I'm just going to leave it minimized. Now, within this screen, there's a few other things you can do. You can see that I'm using the black desktop here. By right-clicking on the blank space, you can actually select the background color. Now, a lot of people like working with the gray. Default light gray, for example. I've always preferred black. I found that allows me to really maximize the color. I don't get as much feedback. I'll operate in a slightly lower light with a little less reflection on the screen. I don't have any glare. I don't have any reflections. I'm not getting any contaminating light. So guess what? I want as little light as possible coming back at me. The only light that I want to see is what's coming off the colors on my photo. That's personal preference. I leave that up to you. Once again, it's just simply right-clicking here. Now, if you go up to the top, as I've shown you in the last video, you can also right-click here, and you can select various things such as map, book, slideshow, or you can deselect all these different things. Once again, it's just simply by right-clicking on that area there. Now, this right here is also something you can start going through. There's all these different things, but there's something that I don't have that you probably do have, and you're probably going, well, wait, what about this? Yes, if you were to hit T, as in Tango, T on your keyboard, you'll notice the toolbar appears. This is personal preference. I like removing this because I don't really use most of this stuff visually, except for when I'm doing color sorting and stuff like that, but that's just simply not something I worry about right now. I've disabled most of this stuff, and the reason for that is because I can do flagging and picking using the key commands. You may wish to leave this up. It obviously occupies a good ½ inch on my screen. It's entirely your prerogative what you wish to have on there. For me, I hit T as in Tango, and it hides it. So there it goes. This leaves me with effectively the view that I wish to have. Now, presets will come in handy. Presets are something you may wish to play with, and you can see how in the top preview up there, how each one of those is changing just by mousing over. It's giving you the smart preview, not the smart preview, it's giving you the preview that I've built. Because I've elected to do the 1-for-1, it changes them really quickly. If I don't do the 1-for-1, that takes a little bit of time to process for whatever reason. So the bottom line is that's one of the benefits of actually building a 1-for-1 is I can go through and really rapidly just see the changes as they affect the photo without actually applying it. Now, you're saying, well, no big deal. I can just apply it, and yeah, sure enough, there it goes, sharpening 5, freaks Lucky out, but why do that when I can just see the preview up in the top left? Now, you can do the same thing over here as I've done before, down below. Same with this over here, if I can find it. Oh, maybe I've maximized too much, so I got to shrink this back down. And yep, there it goes. So you just essentially increase the size or decrease. I like keeping it minimal. I'm a very minimal guy. If you need more room to operate, so be it. Now, I don't need these right now. I use my presets for the most part as a post processor. So all these things are going to be done once I've done my changes over here. So I just hide this. What it does is it effectively gives me more field of view. Now, if I know I'm working on one particular photo, I get rid of everything. And so now I have a complete image in front of me. I'm able to see everything. And if you wish, you can zoom in. And as freaky as that might be to stare into the eye of Lucky, that's what you get. Now, I want to mention and apologize. I did select, I elected not to use the flash on Lucky. I didn't want to scare Lucky. It's Lucky. I mean, look how cute he is, you know? So be it. 2500 ISO is what we're operating with. Now, with the D810, 2500 ISO, as you can see, is barely touching anything. This is a complete raw file. And I mean, look at that. That's so clean. Barely any noise at all. It's very functional. With that said, we're going to go ahead and operate on this file and clean it up just a little bit. Now, I believe I have everything, yes. So I have everything enabled here. You can hide some things that you're not going to use just simply by right-clicking, I believe, on any one of these headers. Yes. So let's say, for example, you just don't want to operate with tone curve. Well, you can get rid of it. Let's say you don't want to use your hue, saturation, and luminance. You can get rid of your adjustments. You can get rid of your toning. You can get rid of your lens corrections. Anyways, you get the point. You can get rid of all these things. I leave everything on because it's just as easy for me to simply minimize what I'm not going to be using so that I can maximize it at a later time. With that said, I will leave the calibration open, as well as lens corrections, the detail, and that is that. Now, if I know if I'm going to be working with colors and I want to modify them in any particular regard, I'll come in here and I'll leave this open. So what you typically get from me is a nice balance, a nice workflow that's going to encapsulate everything within Lightroom. Tone curve has its place. It's a little more advanced. You can play with it. A lot of it's experimentation. Once you understand what you're doing, a lot of it becomes science. Until then, just go ahead and leave it minimized for now. Don't try and get yourself too confused yet. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because this is your core adjustment. This basic window is where you want to do most of your core adjustments. You don't want to go down a tone curve first and start adjusting your highlights because it has a different effect on the photo than simply going up here and adjusting your highlights. I'll explain that maybe at some other date in a later tutorial. I really don't want to confuse anybody now. Pardon me while I take a drink. Now for Lightroom, I'm going to walk you through my basic workflow. Now, as I indicated before in the import video, you can elect to do most of this yourself in presets when you import the file. So most of my files when I import for a particular wedding or an event or something to that effect, all have already imported 1 or 2 files from that day, maybe 10 files from that day, and I'll actually go through and create presets. Now, it doesn't really matter when you do this. You can do this at the beginning or you can do it at the end. And the reason I say this is because you can actually come back down here and you can actually right-click, go to Develop Settings, and actually copy the settings. When you copy the settings, all of these things come up here, which are in essence your preset to some degree. There's some variables in here though, which is why the presets actually come in handy. These are in essence the settings of this photo. So if I copied those presets, I can then right-click, go Develop Settings, and paste settings. Now since I haven't copied settings, well, let's just copy real fast, you'll see that it is actually highlighted when I go to Develop Settings and paste. Now how that'll work is pretty cool. Let's just do some quick adjustments really fast. You can go through here, and so there's Lucky, and everybody's happy. Great. Now, if I wanted to copy this, I can go, yes, this is exactly how I want my photo to look. But you know what? The next photo is in the exact same lights, almost the exact same settings. Great. Let's go. And there's Lucky, exactly the same. Now, if you goof up and you just want to return to the basics, you would go back down over here and right-click again, go back to your Develop Settings, and just simply do a reset. Reset returns your photo to default, standard import, base raw file. There's no adjustments done to this. It eliminates everything you've done to this file to include presets, to include everything. Now, I have not tested yet, but I believe the keywording still remains. Honestly, I've never thought about looking after the fact, but I'm pretty sure it's tied to the metadata upon import, and it's actually going to be adjusted on the library screen. So be it. Now, with that said, you can walk through this process fairly simply by either sliding, by clicking and sliding, as you can see I'm doing there, and if you watch Lucky, the effect is fairly obvious. Or you can click on the word once. You see how it says modify highlights using the plus and the minus key. So I've already hit minus, so now I would want to hit plus, and now it's doing it in increments of 5. Now you can actually change this in the settings, I believe, to do increments of 1, 10, 15, 20, etc. 5 is a decent incremental count for something like this. Your shadows operate very much the same way, and in truth, just about every single slider within Lightroom uses a click to modify. Now, there are some other places where you will not be able to use the click to modify. if you go into the adjustment brush, for example, which is this thing up in the top right corner up here, the adjustment brush has a very similar window as the basic. The difference between the adjustment brush, however, is that you're operating on a very limited scope. So in this particular regard, let's say that I wanted a stripe of adjustment to go right down Lucky's forehead there. What I can do is actually go through and adjust just that one stripe. As you can see, adjusted there. Now I know it's silly, and I'm sorry for messing up Lucky and giving him a thing there, but in essence, that's that. Now, if you were to click here and go to modify it, notice how on the screen it's saying shadows. For whatever reason, Lightroom doesn't do this. Adobe has determined that the click to adjust incrementally doesn't work. Well, that's fine. It's actually, to be honest with you, pretty easy to use the slider and then to do minor adjustments just simply by clicking and typing. You can also return to 0 by double tapping. If you have one of these adjustment brushes and you want to get rid of it, just hit delete. Going back out, simply closing this, obviously closes by clicking. You're back out to your basics. Now, all of these can be returned to 0 simply by double clicking. No matter what you do, you can go through the history the same way you would in a Word document or something to that effect, simply by hitting Control-Z or Command-Z, and you can undo. As you can see, it takes me right back to where I started. Now, Macs, you can redo, of course, by doing Shift, Command-Z, and of course PCs. It's been so long, I believe it would be Control-Y. I honestly don't remember. It's been so long. Okay. It functions using basic Mac and Windows commands is the bottom line. So if you have some things you want to use, Control-C, for example, for copy, Control-V for paste, you can probably use them in here. Now let's go ahead and work through the process really quickly, just so you can see what exactly each one of these does. Now the highlights, as you can imagine, is going to adjust your highlights for better or worse. So the effect here is obvious. Now sometimes you're going to want to diminish the highlights if you are using strong lights, or if you're not, bring them up a bit. In this particular case, since I didn't use a flash and there's no direct lighting on Lucky, I'm actually going to go the opposite of what I normally do. I'm going to go a little higher in the highlights just to bring out a little more of Lucky. Now, there are some shadows in here. Now I can either choose to bring these out, or I can bring it back down and hide Lucky in the shadows. I think it actually looks pretty cool, and if you look, there I am in the reflection of Lucky taking a picture. With that said, you can get rid of that to some degree by using the shadows. Now obviously reflections in somebody's eyeball is not why you're going to adjust the shadows. It literally is adjusting the shadows, the dark areas. Most people will elect, if they have the camera gear to support it, to go all the way to 100%. And most people in an outdoor standard photo will go all the way down on the highlights there. Like I've said, for this particular photo, I'm going to go 50, and I'm probably going to go 65 here, because that's about the good balance point where I want this to be up. And when you add the vignetting later, you'll see how this makes this look pretty decent. Now your white balance, there's two ways to adjust this, as I've mentioned before. One, simply experimenting, of course, clicking or typing. Now the other way, rather than just simply experimenting, is to see where this photo stands in terms of a white balance. So if you hold down the Option key or the Alt key, your screen blacks out. Now, if you look over here, I've released the mouse. If you click here and hold, and then hold your Alt key, the mask appears, and you can basically start to slide to see where the screen's tolerance is. Now, if you look in the top right corner of your screen, you can actually see the histogram. It's adjusting with me as I'm sliding. If you notice, right in the top right corner, my whites are peaking. You see how they're blasting? You want to come down just before that. In this particular case, I'm going to sit right at about 65. Now you're probably thinking, wow, that looks like crap. Well, yeah, it does. There's a few things that I can do to fix that, though. Before we get to that, I've always said, you know what, I want to get my blacks next. This is my core adjustment area. I'm going to do my core first, and then I'm going to go through the tone, maybe presence, vibrance, and I can do the white balance later. This functions very much the same way by hitting Alt. So you'll click and hold, hit Alt. Now you're functioning on a white screen, and you can start to go down. And once again, top left corner, you can see where I'm starting to peak on my blacks, and you can see that reflected positively or negatively on the screen itself. Now I like to go down just enough to where it's not too dark. I like neutral tones to some degree. So I'm going to leave it about -25. For my photos with my camera, that's about the standard that I've been able to go to before things start getting a little too harsh. Artistically, you can elect to do this all you want. And quite frankly, 45 is usually about where I want to go up to, despite what I'm seeing on the screen. Now, clarity is a pretty easy one to see reflected on the screen. You can slide it yourself and see things become a lot more harsh and then a lot softer. Functionally, that isn't probably going to work for 99% of your photos, just as that's not going to work for 99% of your photos. But somewhere in between, you're going to find a healthy balance. That's up to you to decide. I usually save clarity for last. Now, vibrance just adds a bit of punch and life to your photos, or conversely, can deny it the punch and life. You can actually lower this down just a bit, or raise it up. Now, for this particular setting, I actually do want to lower it down just a bit because of the colors on the screen. Lucky's little fleece there, it's a little pink, and Lucky seems to be getting some negative feedback on the white balance, but that's easy to adjust. In this particular case, because of this, I'm going to go ahead and adjust the white balance right now. Now, if I'm operating with a subject that I know is pure white, I would essentially click on my eyedropper here, which is the white balance selector, and then I move it out. If you notice, you don't need to click and hold. It's just a single click, and it comes out and it brings up your settings there. Now, if you right-click, actually, it should be in your particular case maybe a mouse wheel. On the mouse, it's simply the two-finger slide. You can zoom in or out on what you're moving over here. So in this particular case, that's the eyeball. And you can start to see some of the adjustments here. The bottom line of this is it allows you to find something that's white. Now I know Lucky is a solid white guinea, so I'm going to move over here to where I see the purest white on Lucky, and I'm going to select my left click. Now all of a sudden you can see much more natural tones. This is how our eyes see it. If you had white light in the room as an example, this is how Lucky would appear with a white light. When you click on your white balance over here, you'll notice this is custom. A minute ago, it was as shot. This is what my camera said would be normal. It's because I shoot with an auto white balance detector. Now, that's entirely your prerogative if you want to let your camera determine the white balance for you, but the power of shooting in RAW allows you to adjust the white balance later. You can go through these different options as presets. Each one of them will have its own setting, benefit, plus and minus. Now, the key to understanding this is, notice I'm going to a more natural setting here. This would typically be considered daylight, which would be your white light. It's 5500 Kelvin is considered your standard. This is where you're going to get into trouble. If you start getting caught up in these numbers here, and you start thinking, well, this should be normal. Why isn't this normal? Well, you're going to be lying to yourself because, as I've explained, it isn't how things work in particular settings. Using the white balance dropper, the selector, on an area of your screen that you know is going to be white is going to be the most benefit for you. Now, if you're operating in an environment, there will simply be no white objects to bounce off of. You may want to drop a shot of a white card. Get yourself a pure white card, drop it in the scene somewhere, and take a shot, and actually use that as the baseline. And you can just basically go forward from there. So if you know that your subject is going to be sitting here, for example, there's my white card, I can click on that, and ta-da, I've made the adjustment. Now if you notice, there was a difference between the two there. I'll go ahead and hit Control Z so you can see 2750 versus that, which is 2850. Your tint, so be it. Now, you can do your adjustment here as well. So if you want this to be just a little warmer, click on it and then go plus. Or if you want it to be a little colder, click on it and go minus. You notice it starts to get pretty wonky if you go too far in either direction. A lot of white balance techniques are going to be to the user's preference, to the viewer's preference, to the artist's preference, whatever you want your photos to look like. I don't typically go with a standard adjustment like this. I'll actually go more with a photo that's a little warmer. But with that said, I actually have a preset that does that for me. This mild filter here is an 81A warming filter. You can actually download these. It's simply tinting. And if you notice, it just brought a hint in there. Now I'll go ahead and undo this so you can see the difference, and then redo. You can just see the mild adjustment there. Personally, to my eyes, to my preference, I feel this has much more warmth and vibrance, just enough to where it's not a clown car, but it's not too cold either. And that's allowed me to maintain my white card, so I'm true to my color, and yet I'm a little warmer. It's a little more inviting. Once again, this is artistic preference. It really is. And mind you, these settings over here for 99% of my photos will not look like this. For this particular photo, because I didn't use a flash, because my ISO is 2500, because of my shutter speed and everything, my camera has automatically done all these crazy things, and yeah, that's what Lucky looks like. So moving on really fast here, we'll get down to the vibrance. Now let's see what happens when I add 25 vibrance in here. As you notice, now that I've balanced my white balance, now that I've actually made it true, Lucky actually looks pretty cool. Now I'm not adjusting the whites. Now I'm getting more color out of my background. Now I'm actually getting a tremendous amount of more color, but you can take this too far. So you obviously want to find a nice balance. In this particular case, I usually find anywhere between 25 and 35 as being the best for my camera and the best for my eyes. That's just what I prefer. Saturation, on the other hand, it'll have the opposite effect. This literally enhances your colors to the degree of saturation, and if you notice, it has a dramatic effect on the appearance of the photo. Now, if I wanted this to be more of a neutral scene, I'd bring the colors way back, despite the vibrance settings, and I can accomplish that. If I wanted to get a little more colors out of this, I could punch it up a bit, and you notice things become a lot more vibrant, and not just that, the colors are a lot more rich. This is something that you have to be careful with. If you look down here in the bottom left corner, the more that I increase this, the more noise is being introduced in this screen. Not to mention the fact that Lucky looks like a clown. You'll actually see it's quite dramatic. So you have to really be careful when you're using the saturation. The other place you're going to notice this is up here in the shadows. On particular sensors, when you increase the shadows to a particular level, the noise that's introduced is dramatic and more visible. For this particular camera, being the 810, I really don't have to concern myself too much with ISO. With crop sensor cameras, lesser sensors, you really do have to concern yourself with that. So don't find yourself in too high of an ISO without the ability to correct it. Now, most of my pictures, I do just simply leave it at 35. I've adjusted my filter, I've applied my settings, and as you notice, I haven't even adjusted the exposure or the contrast yet. These become fine-tuned. That's really all this is. So now, rather than modifying the highlights or the whites or the blacks, I'm adjusting the overall scene when I brighten it up or when I decrease. Now, for this particular photo, I'm going to go about 20, maybe 10, 20. I don't know. I think 20 gives a little more punch, but what's going to happen when I add my vignette in here is it's going to darken everything else, allow me to punch Lucky right up. Now, had I taken my time, I'd have probably made the foreground here not so shadowed. You know, obviously there was some light coming in. You can see the light sources coming in from Lucky's right here, my left, over the wall that you can see behind her there. So she's centered up, and there's a shadow there. But nonetheless, vignetting is a whole other tutorial. So I'm going to leave it just like that. Now scrolling down, as I've mentioned, you can adjust the tone curve. The tone curve allows you to do a few other settings once you've fine-tuned the above. Now, let's say I wanted Lucky to have just a bit more punch. I can bring up her highlights just a bit more. Let's say I wanted the lights to be brought down just a bit, or up. It just doesn't look good, right? But that's what you can do. Same with the darks. But you can notice this is affecting a lot more than what we've seen before, differently. And same with this. This entire screen here is a tutorial upon itself. You can basically spend an entire day learning this. For right now, let's just close it and leave it alone. You don't necessarily need it to produce decent photos. Now, your hue, saturation, and luminance is actually really handy. In this particular case, I don't want to adjust too much on this photo. I'm trying to go after just a natural photo, but let's say that this red here really is just too distracting for me. I can click on this little icon right here. So that's one left click, if you notice, it's highlighted now, and I can drag it over. Now see how my mouse has changed? And I can bring it over here, click, and hold, and then drag either up or down. Now if you notice, it's affecting more on the screen than simply what is visible to your eye by the naked eye. The sensor is actually detecting there's more to this red than simply pure red. As you can imagine, when you're looking at your color scale, there's 16 million different colors coming across this here. So obviously, just by clicking on one little pixel here, we're not going to get the full spectrum from the visible eye. With that said, that's a really handy way to bring out just a bit more color of, say, this yellow. So now all of a sudden, my colors are a lot more vibrant. You can see it raised the orange, it raised the yellow, and so be it. You know, I just did something which I realized I probably should have mentioned to you guys. You can click on any one of these and then hit tab, and it will tab through in order, top to bottom, what's visible. Now you notice it skipped the tone curve because tone curve's not there. You can go all the way down, so it basically goes from top to bottom what's visible. Now, the profile corrections are very important for a lot of different cameras. For mine, it just simply increases or decreases the vignetting. This is going to be personal preference. I like the camera more or less with the vignetting by default. The lens itself already has a beautiful vignette to it. I just leave it as it is. But on some of my other lenses and other cameras, I will adjust. You can see how dramatically it affects the screen. In this particular case, I like Lucky the way he is, the way she is. Anyways, now moving down here to sharpening. Sharpening is something that a lot of professionals will elect to do using secondary software or even importing into Photoshop, which will be another tutorial in the near future. This is something that is entirely your preference. Most of my photos I'll just simply export with an 85 or a 75. Now, you can see how this affects things better by zooming in. So once again, you just move your mouse over with the key there, and then you click, and it'll zoom in and allow you to see things up close. Now, by sharpening, watch what happens on the screen to the left there. You start to see a pretty dramatic adjustment. As I've mentioned, 85 is about the balance that I've found with my camera that's tolerable. Masking comes in handy. As you can see, it starts to tone back just a bit. Or you can adjust your luminance, which is, in essence, your noise reduction. In this particular case, given the ISO, I'm probably going to go up to like 60, which you can see there. But what you start to notice is I'm actually losing sharpness because all this is doing is balancing out the pixels. It's literally roughing. It's just smoothing them out. For my camera with 2500 ISO, I found the breaking point, the balance is going to be about 45 to 60. It gives me a nice balance. As you can see in this particular case, I go with maybe 55, and the noise is pretty much gone for the most part. Now it's still there, obviously, and you can bring this all the way up if you want, and then watch how it affects the screen once my camera decides to catch up. Completely smooths everything out. It may look nice to some eyes, but what I'm seeing is a whole lot of detail lost. Now you can do some really cool things with this if you wish, but the bottom line is, don't try and lose all of your detail. If you're noticing that you're losing too much detail, try and lower your sharpening and bring it back. just dial it back just a bit more. If it doesn't do enough for you, bring it back even more, because you can adjust a lot of this later. And if you notice, at 55 with a 65 in the sharpen, it's actually pretty tolerable. I mean, this really isn't all that bad. Considering I didn't use a flash and I'm handheld, I'm pretty happy with that. Now, I'm not expecting to print this photo, and I'm certainly not going to hang it on my gallery, but you know what? It's still a cute photo of Lucky the guinea pig. So be it. Now, as I've mentioned here, you do have your profile corrections as well as chromatic aberration. Now, for a lot of crop sensors, if you're working in an environment with some odd light, something to that effect, you will want to adjust your chromatic aberration. You'll want to go through and search for the purple or the green. You'll see it in various areas. You can see how the camera, or how the eyedropper's changing to purple on the tip there. All I'm doing is just basically mousing over to see if there's any areas on this screen that are going to have any chromatic aberrations. You'll typically see this near the edge of things that have odd light behind them, or for whatever reason. If you wish to have a good lesson on chromatic aberration, get a book. I'm not going to walk you through it. It's its own tutorial in itself. The elimination thereof, though, is fairly easy. You would, in essence, click there. You can see the settings are adjusted here. Now, you can have positive and negative effects on this. If you slide too much, you'll start to notice some negative effects appear on the screen. The reason for that is because you're literally adjusting the purple hue on the fringes in some regard. You may not be seeing too much, but it's there. Since this camera doesn't really have that issue, since this shot doesn't have that issue, I'm just going to leave it off. It doesn't affect me that much anyways at this point in time. So clicking back on basic, now you can go over here and click on these different options. Now for this particular shot, you notice I'm not quite level. It was a handheld shot. My left over here is higher than over here. Now I can allow Adobe Lightroom to do this automatically, which it may or may not. In this particular case, it didn't. I can do level, I can do vertical, I can do full. It doesn't have enough data to work with. That's fine. I can do it myself. So, personal preference, you can crop either before, after, in the middle. I usually do it after. I'll adjust the entire scene, really trying to balance everything out. And then I just simply click on that. Now in the crop and straighten tool, this is a really, really important tool. It allows you to work with the rule of thirds. You can do a bunch of different things here. Constrain to aspect ratio, crop to same aspect ratio. You can adjust your angle, or you can just simply click and drag. Click here and drag. See how it's constraining? Click here and drag. Same here. What I'll usually do is I'll mouse up just a little bit like this, and then I'll drag it around and find a good balance. Going for the rule of thirds, if you will, so I want to bring it over just a tad bit, and bring it up just a tad bit, and try and balance it out. Now, of course, if I was caring about this being a perfect composition, I probably would have lined it up a little differently, but I think that looks pretty decent as it is right there, and I'm really not trying to win any competitions with this shot, so I'm going to leave it as is. Now, one thing I did notice, though, as I mentioned, is that this camera shot a little crooked. That's because, well, user error, if you will. So with a mild crop, and then once again clicking there, I can straighten that out to some degree. So be it. Whatever you wish to adjust, however you wish your photos to look, is entirely up to you. Now, the aspect ratio is really important. This is something that you can lock. When you right-click here, you can see constrained aspect ratio. It's also adjustable down here under constrained crop. When you do this, these come in handy. What you're essentially going to be presented with are these options. The 1-for-1, the 4x5, the 8.5 and 11, the 5x7, or you can start entering your customs. Most cameras these days operate at 2x3 or 4x6, which in essence is that ratio. Most frames, on the other hand, are going to operate on an 8x10, 4x5, which you can see changes things just a bit. When I say most frames, I don't mean production frames. I mean your frames from the store that grandma's going to buy at Walmart. She's not going to have an easy time finding an 8x12. And if she does, it's probably going to be a bit more expensive And then if grandma was to look for 8x10s, which are common, very, very common, obviously you saw how much I lost. In this particular case, once again, you're not going to see 8x12, you're going to see a 2x3 or 4x6. This, once again, is a whole tutorial. I'm not going to get you locked up on that. If you ever mess up and you want to reset, just right-click on your screen here and reset crop, and everything goes back to normal. I'll do a histogram tutorial at another date. These things are complex for initial perspectives, but once you get used to them and understand how to manipulate them, you can see they're actually quite powerful. There's a lot of benefit in understanding this right out of the camera. If you're not using your histogram, you should probably stop this tutorial right now and go learn how to use this, because when you're taking your photos, this matters the most. Once it's in here, it's a little more difficult to work with when your shadows are blasted or too high. We'll leave it as that. This essentially concludes my tutorial on Lightroom, going from the import phase to a base development phase, walking you through the basics of Lightroom. You can tell I didn't touch on the spot removal, I didn't do the red eye correction, I certainly didn't review the gradient or the radial filters. These are very powerful tools. I briefly touched on the adjustment brush, which is, once again, one of the most important tools for most photographers these days. I will save those for their own tutorials. For now, though, thank you very much for watching, and please go ahead and feel free to leave some feedback in the comments, because I know that I'm new to this and I don't want to, well, I don't know, waste my time by wasting your time. How's that? If you've got some guidance on how to improve, please feel free to send me an email at info@element.gs, or feel free to leave a comment below, as I've mentioned. Thank you very much for